This episode of Gather and Go is sponsored by Coastal Mississippi. Play Coastal Mississippi. 62 miles of shoreline, outdoor adventures, casinos, fishing, and fantastic food. Perfect for fun-filled itineraries. Visit coastalmississippi.com and go have some fun for fun's sake. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Gather and Go, the podcast that helps you plan, promote, and lead better trips. I'm your host, Brian Jewell. I am thrilled to have you with us today. And as always, our promise to you is that we're going to do everything we can to make that investment of your time worth your while. Now, one of the reasons I am so thrilled that you joined us for this episode is I am thrilled to bring you our featured conversation with our very special guest, Andrew Zimmern. That's right, the one and only TV icon and culinary travel legend, Andrew Zimmern. You know him from the Travel Channel and from the Food Network, from the Bizarre Foods franchise. He's an American treasure, and we were lucky enough to get some of his time. I can't wait for you to hear what he has to say about his history in travel, his outlook on travel, and how he helps people find unique culinary experiences that will showcase the individual and unique parts of the destinations they're visiting without being overwhelmed with tourists. It's a fascinating conversation. I cannot wait for you to hear it. First, though, let's get into some travel news you may have missed. More Americans are traveling abroad today than before the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a study by the MasterCard Economics Institute, which tracks the credit card spending trends of MasterCard customers, there has been a huge uptick in international outbound travel. The study found that as of March 2024, U.S. travel to overseas destinations outside Canada and Mexico has risen 20% higher than its pre-pandemic peak in 2019. Now, this finding corresponds with research from the Conference Board that shows nearly 1 in 5 Americans plans to travel abroad in the next year, up from 1 in 10 Americans in 2019. The MasterCard data found some unexpected destinations trending. According to the data, Japan is the world's fastest growing tourism destination. Other up-and-comers include Romania, Malaysia, and South Korea. Now, these findings are part of the Institute's Travel Trends 2024 report. You can access it free by clicking the link in this episode's show notes. Well, now it's time for the road tip segment of our show. This is the part of every episode where we reach deep into our bag of travel knowledge and pull out some tips from decades on the road that we think will help you make your next trip less stressful and more successful. Now, today's tip comes in the form of a question from a listener named Paul in Nashville. Paul writes, "My wife and I are brand new outbound group tour operators. I recently stumbled upon your podcast and have been binge listening." Thank you for that, Paul. He goes on to say, "We put a high value on dining at local restaurants and would love to carry that over as part of our business model. Sadly, we haven't had much luck with local or chains. We're finding it nearly impossible to find restaurants that are willing to accommodate our desire to give our groups more than 2 or 3 menu items to choose from. Don't even get me started on the per-person costs of even the most limiting menu proposals. We're willing to pay for quality and options, but our lack of experience is making it difficult to set a realistic budget for meals. I would be so grateful for your insight." Well, Paul, thanks for listening. Thanks for reaching out with your question. I can tell you, you are definitely not alone. Nearly every tour operator I talk to right now tells me that finding places for their groups to eat is the biggest challenge they have in the business right now. And for someone like you who really values unique and authentic and high-end culinary experiences, that is even more challenging. Now, I hope you will listen on because Andrew Zimmern's going to have some helpful ideas for you about that very topic in today's interview. But the main thing I can tell you is that this challenge you're having right now is a great example of why it's really critical to work with a local partner at a convention and visitors bureau, destination marketing organization, tourism office, whoever is responsible for promoting tourism to a city, a town, maybe even a state. You need to build relationships with those people and the places you want to visit before you go there. These tourism professionals at these local offices are the best resource you can have when planning a trip to a place, especially a place that you don't know very well or don't have deep relationships of your own. These professionals have deep relationships. They spend tons of time out in the community. They're visiting attractions. They are constantly trying new restaurants. They know which restaurants in town are good for groups and which aren't. They know which restaurants in town have a flexible group menu. They know which ones are more affordable. They may even have some relationship juice that can get you in the door in a place where you wouldn't otherwise be able to get your group in. Now, there's not a lot they can do about the cost of food because that is a problem anywhere you go. It's a problem I run into every time I take my family of 4 out for dinner, let alone a tour group. But setting aside the cost issue, these professionals can do a lot to help you connect with the people who are going to deliver that high quality, authentic culinary experience for your group. Now, some other options for you to think about in addition to working with those local pros. You might get a little bit outside the box and consider taking your group to someplace like a food truck park or even hiring a food truck to come to your hotel or an attraction you're going to be visiting and catering your group's meal directly from their truck. It is fun. It is an interesting way to go. Your people might have more options that way. They're definitely going to remember that as a unique part of their trip. You could also consider taking your group to food halls or markets. Those are surging in popularity in places around the country. You can give people a gift card, or some of these places will allow you to buy local quote unquote bucks or currency or specialized gift cards that they can spend at those food halls to buy from whatever vendor they want, get whatever kind of food they want. And it is usually really memorable, high quality food. Another thing you could look into is dine-arounds. If you're having problems finding single restaurants that can take your whole group, what you could do instead is make reservations at 4 or 5 places nearby in the dining district of your destination, all for the same time, and break your group up into smaller segments and give people the choice to maybe go for Italian, maybe go for Vietnamese, maybe go for steak, maybe go for seafood. And that way they still get that great experience without having to deal with the logistics of feeding 40 or 50 people all at one time. Another interesting option I've seen work well is to reach out to a local catering company. This is something that the local CVB or tourism office in town can help you identify and set up. You can have the caterer bring exactly the food you want to exactly the place you want. And many of the places you visit, museums and attractions, places like that, may welcome you to cater in a meal while you're there. And if they don't, you could certainly look at doing that at your hotel as well. Finally, another thing you could look for is opportunities for off-peak timing. That might mean visiting a restaurant on a day they're usually closed, like a lot of restaurants close to the general public on Mondays. Or you might have luck getting your people in at an off-peak time of day. If the rush at that restaurant is, say, from 11 to 1 for lunch and from 5 to 9 for dinner, bring your people in for a great midday meal at 2:30 or 3. You might find more availability, better pricing. Hey, it never hurts to ask. So use some creativity, but above all, leverage those local contacts to solve your dining problems. I promise you will find a lot of answers in working with the right professionals. That is your road tip of the week. Now, before we go on, I want to share some exciting news from us. If you are the kind of person that likes to consume your podcasts on video, well, we have an exciting announcement. Gather and Go is now on YouTube. That's right. You can watch our interviews with guests like Andrew Zimmern and the many more great guests we have coming up later this year on our YouTube channel. You can see my beautiful face, although I've been told it's a face for radio. But you can see my face. You can see all our great guests. Get much more of the subtext of the interview. And hey, there's a lot of those interviews that we have to cut down for time, but we're posting the entire conversations on YouTube. If you're a video fan, head to YouTube and search Gather and Go with Brian Jewell, or simply click the link in the show notes to check out our YouTube library and see our best interviews there. We're adding more and more with every episode. We are excited to bring that resource to you. Now, it's just about time for us to get into our featured conversation with Andrew Zimmern. As we go, let me remind you, you don't need to worry about taking any notes because I'm taking some notes for you. And when the interview wraps up, I'm going to come back and review some of the most meaningful and helpful things that Andrew had to say. And hey, let me encourage you to stick around to the end of that wrap up, because at the end, we are going to have a little conversation about overtourism and whether it is a problem that is really impacting American cities. We've talked about that before, and believe it or not, my outlook has changed a bit. I'm excited to share that with you. It's going to be the subject of today's Hot Minute. You won't want to miss that. We'll be right back with Andrew Zimmern.
Let's go, my kiddos! Rise and shine! I am tired of early morning alarms and sitting in carpool lines. I want to relax with a spa day. No more family meetings. I want a family outing. Booked a big one there. My to-do list has taken over. How about a to-dream list instead? First up, play Coastal and go have some fun for fun's sake.
Make a vacation declaration of your own and start planning your escape to the Mississippi Gulf Coast at coastalmississippi.com.
All right, everybody. My guest today is an Emmy and James Beard award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, and traveler. He's the creator of hit TV shows including the Bizarre Foods franchise, What's Eating America, The Zimmern List, and more. He serves as a global goodwill ambassador for the United Nations World Food Program and the Nature Conservancy. Today, you can see him on Magnolia Network's Family Dinner, where he explores culture, geography, and history through meals with ordinary families throughout America. Andrew Zimmern, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. How are you?
I am doing great. Excited to have you here. I would love for you to tell us your story about how you went from being a culinary expert who nobody knew outside of Minneapolis to this travel icon who people all around America know. How did that happen for you?
Don't sell me short. The show airs in 170 countries.
Excuse me.
Well, it's funny. I mean, because I think it plays to your question. I don't say it with ego. It's just a fascinating thing about the way media moves 20 years ago and even more so today with streaming. You know, it's interesting. It's like coming back to the place that you always were to find that you had never left, sort of. When I grew up, I traveled a lot with my parents. I had probably been around the world twice by the time I had graduated high school.
Wow.
Mostly with my father. My mother wrote books about shells and did a lot of stuff in the Caribbean and South America. My father made sure that I saw Europe and Asia as a young man. And we continued to go back to Europe and Asia. So, you know, you flash ahead, and I have this culinary career and fairly well known in the 80s in New York in the restaurant world. Then crashed and burned on a lot of drugs and alcohol, made it out of New York alive, got sober in January of 92 in Minnesota, opened up a restaurant here. It was very successful. And I found myself telling a lot of stories. Wednesday nights, for some reason, were slow in our restaurant. So because I had spent a lot of time in Asia and I loved cooking Chinese and Vietnamese food, we started doing that as a special menu on Wednesdays. It went over great. So I was telling stories to my staff and try to get them engaged in the culture of those countries. And I realized that maybe I needed a bigger audience. So I started, but by the way, I should say at that time I was doing walk-on roles on early Gen 1 HD TV shows, on early Gen 1 syndicated shows like Rebecca's Garden, where I was on both shows, typical Mary Ellen and Rebecca's Garden, I was the sort of the house chef. So whenever they needed something cooked, I'd get $50 and I'd come on and cook something. And because of that, I got to gather tape and I was pushing it around, and eventually I got a meeting at Travel Channel, and they said, well, what do you want to do? And I pitched them on the horrific show. Terrible. The working title was The Wandering Spoon.
Wow.
I would go around the world and teach people about patience, tolerance, and understanding through food. And they said, that's great. That's a superb PBS show. You'll probably make 8 or 10 of them, and you'll get a lot of applause from your peers. And then you're back at square one. But come back tomorrow, and if you can give us a hook, and if you can make this 70% entertainment, 30% learning, as opposed to 70% learning, 30% entertainment, we'll talk more. And so I did. And that's how Bizarre Foods was born. They said, great, go make 5 minutes of it. Then it was like, go find a production company, make a pilot. Then it will, you just kept going through the steps. Now you have to remember, Bizarre Foods, first episode dropped in 2007. We made it in 2006. We sold it in 2005. So you're talking about 2003 and 4. I was in my sales mode for this. So there weren't a lot of shows on that were also doing this kind of thing. Bourdain had not started a cook's tour, which originally was on Food Network for a year before it got renamed and relaunched on Travel Channel as No Reservations. So, we were just learning as we were going. But the one thing that I knew was stuff around the world for at least the first couple seasons that we could go and see. And so to pitch a show about Seoul, Korea, and say we're going to go to Noryangjin seafood market and we're going to see some fish and other sea creatures, sea squirts, something that Americans had really never seen before, was kind of a no-brainer. And around it, we were going to build these other stories. And secretly, it was kind of the Trojan horse. I sold the network. We were going to teach people about patience, tolerance, understanding with other people in a world that was seemingly growing in its appetite for defining ourselves by our differences. And that's really how it was born.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're coming close to 2 decades in TV, much longer than that in travel. How have you seen travel change, say from when you were traveling as a kid to traveling in the 2000s, and then now we're in the 2020s? You're still out there. What has changed about travel?
The knowledge of the traveler. When I was traveling with my father in the 60s and 70s, you knew where you were going. You maybe had a Frommer's guide or something that was already years out of date by the time it publishes. You went to your place, and then you had to seek out wisdom once you were there on what you were going to do. The concierge in the hotel, or the friendly person at the bus station, or the shopkeeper who spoke your language, quickly became the person who gave you your itinerary. Right?
Yeah.
I think people today forget that, in the 60s, the 70s, there's no computers, there's no cell phones, there's magazine articles that are out of date, books that are out of date, and you kind of cobble together a list of things you like and want to see, and you then went, verified that it was there, and then head out to experience it. Nowadays, you can literally plan everything on your cell phone, your laptop. I mean, you can see video of what you're going to eat 3 nights later in, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. And that's crazy to think that that's how far we've come. And so I think yes, of course, places change, people change, cultures change, geopolitical forces are at work so that the face of an entire country changes. entire worlds change, right? Australia, which is now everyone's, one of everyone's dream sort of destinations, was, a bunch of sleepy little cities. But now, because of the international business boom there, the migration, the emigration there from Southeast Asia has literally changed the face of that country. The wine industry, the cheese making industry, the growth of culinary makers there has created a food and wine culture in Australia that is world class and as good as anywhere else. So people now can go and seek that out in a way that they didn't seek it out before. And I think media has a lot to do with that. You can see where you're going and see if you want to do it. So I think the biggest change is the ability for the traveler to understand where they're going and to be able to make decisions. Now that makes it a lot more competitive on the ground for the people who are supplying services, whether it's restaurants or car services or hotels or ticket brokers for theater in London. I remember going with my father, and we never buy tickets for theater. You walk up and you get not so great seat signs, you luck out and you get great seats. But we would go to theater almost every night in London when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, whenever we would stop on the way back to the United States, because it was easy to get a flight from London to New York. And my father loved London. Now, good luck, right? I mean, it's the same thing like going to New York. You got to buy your tickets way in advance. So it's pretty, I think it's changed dramatically, some for the better, some for the worse. I think the act of getting out of your comfort zone has decreased. Because for those that don't want to get out of their comfort zone, they can now plan a trip that way. They don't have whereas before you didn't have a choice. And I think the reason that that's a shame is that travel's transformative. I don't know of anything else other than personal tragedy that can change a human being. You go away on a trip. You have to ask questions. You don't know where you're going. You have to be curious. You take more risks. You do things you would never do at home, right? At home, I'm never leaving the house at 8 a.m. and going seeing new things I've never seen before until 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Just doesn't happen. And so the learning of other cultures that way, taking all those risks, you import some of that wisdom and that healthy bravado and that curiosity. You bring that back home and it expands your horizons and become more patient, tolerant, and understanding with other people. You learn new ideas, different ways of doing things. And I think nowadays people can afford to play it safe. And they can actually plan, they can build that into their experience.
Yeah. So many people today are traveling based on a culinary experience they want to have. Maybe they've seen you do something, or they've seen an influencer on Instagram, a post about something amazing. How do people maintain that authentic connection with the culture through a culinary experience when it's become so produced and staged? How do we get over that hump of the glossy, I want to go there because I saw it online, and find those amazing, authentic experiences that are going to create that transformation, and you're not just, posing for your next TikTok?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that there's still a lot of places that are big viral social media moments and great magazine articles or online articles that when you get there are still not populated by a lot of people who look like us. It's fascinating to me. I was in Taipei right before COVID, and went to some of my favorite night markets, and it was there were some tourists there, but it was mostly Taiwanese, and I was I've found that really reassuring. You know, I just remember being online for an oyster omelet. And I remember looking on the line and saying, well, at least I'm still the only person who looks like me. Now, if you want to go to, well, I'll give you a really recent example. I think the news broke last week that a taco vendor in Mexico City got a Michelin star.
Wow.
Or a Bib Gourmand notification. I have to reread the article. I've been away for 4 or 5 days in Las Vegas, going to 3 Dead and Company shows. So I'm behind on my food news, but I'm pretty sure that I have that right. Now, because so many people from America go to Mexico City, so many people from other South American capitals, Europe, and Mexico City is a huge food destination for so many people. I can't imagine how overwhelming that line there is now, right? And because of the ease of use, I think it's, you know, does it mean you shouldn't go? No, you should go. Famously, what was it in Hong Kong? Tim Ho Wan got a Michelin star for their dumplings. And now there's 12 of them around the country. You know, they've used that to leverage the success to expand. Should you still go to Tim Ho Wan in Hong Kong? Maybe. There's a lot of other people doing dumplings just as well. You don't have to wait online, and it's not going to cost you as much as it does Tim Ho Wan. But I'm not sure that the overproduction and this food world that we live in that is dominated by the Instagram photo makes the food experience there any less enjoyable. Now, that being said, in one of my episodes in Singapore, we went to Mary's Laksa, which I thought was the best laksa place that I had ever eaten that dish. And by the way, it's all they served. You know, they had 500 portions of noodles. They had enough laksa broth for 500 portions. Everything was geared to selling 500 portions from 11 in the morning till 11 at night.
Wow.
So I guess the next year Bourdain went to Mary's Laksa. And at that point, they've got the 2 biggest travel food people at the time telling everyone to go to Mary's Laksa. Now, there aren't a lot of people going to Singapore, but there's enough. There's enough. And at that point, Singapore was getting hot. Now, I went back to Singapore about, 7 years later. And I took my family and got in a car and went out to Mary's Laksa. And there's a much bigger line. And I hop in and, sitting there online, my baseball cap, I'm not playing the celebrity card or anything like that. And I guess someone recognized me and from the staff and went inside and told Mary's daughter, who spoke English, and Mary's daughter comes out and she starts screaming at me.
Oh, no.
You and Tony, you ruined this business. And she's sort of half joking, but half not.
Yeah.
And she said, we now basically, once she calmed down, she explained to me that, they had to quadruple what they were serving. They felt it was too overwhelming. I thought it was as good as ever. I mean, they just were producing more. They bought a couple other burners. They did more prep. They rented a little place to do more prep. Like, they're clearly doing better financially. And in America, we would say, well, that's great news. You've expanded, you've quadrupled your sales, which means you've brought quite a lot of more dollars to the bottom line. Mary and her daughter didn't care about the bottom line. They were earning enough. They supported the family. They had a lovely life. They opened at 11. They closed at 11. It was easy. It was manageable. And in a sense, and this is, by the way, pre-cell phone, right? And pre-social media, when Tony and I went there, they felt it had already sort of changed what they did. So there is that, Brian, your point is well taken. At a certain point, depending what place it is, too much tourism can trample over what made it appealing in the first place to want to be there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's your point about discovering new stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what I do, I always go, a recent trip to Cartagena is probably a great example of it. I wanted to try new places and new things. I knew I was going to go to certain markets, and the fruit market and the wet market, and because I love eating in those places. Couple good restaurants in the old city that I wanted to go to. But what I did was I went on Instagram and I found the local food guy, not at the national newspaper, but at the local weekly. And I started following him, and I started following a couple of local chefs down there. And I sort of triangulated where they were taking pictures of with their family on like Saturday or so. Oh, Sunday with the family at this place that serves fried fish at the beach. And I'm like, bingo. I get there, and, it wasn't my first time, and I'd made TV there. And so the hotel that I always stay in, there's like a big to-do, and the concierge, and he's got all this. You have to try this, this, and this. There's these new restaurants. They really want you to try it and all the rest. I said, well, no. And they took my bags up, and I walked, because I knew if I didn't get to the guys who were running the door, valeting cars and physically opening the door for entrance, the doormen, if I didn't get to them first, I'd have a problem. So I raced back out, and I grabbed one of the valet guys, one of the door guys, and I just quizzed them. I mean, I'm writing stuff into my phone. Where do you go after work? They're like, oh, you should go to a place. No. I don't want to, not you should go. Where do you go after work? I bet you go to a place for like beer and food when you're off before you go home. And they're like, yeah, we do. Where do you go? And there was this little fratanga around from the hotel. And it was sort of a block or two off the grid, in the sense that the neighborhood transitioned into a real working class neighborhood in the old city. And I went there every single night.
Wow.
With the family. They had the best fried everything, what a fratanga is. They had all of these 20 different juices to choose from. They always had a couple of non-fried items that were sort of like stewed things that grandma made. You had to get there early for it. Someone put music on a boombox on the top of a car, and there was dancing in the street. And my point is, if you want the authentic experiences, you have to ask local people where they go. Because in these times, the dissemination of information about all the cool hip places is already out there. There's already a line in that place. You got to find the stuff that you like through your own sort of navigation tools. And I think look, it's tough for some people. I know folks that travel with me are kind of sick and tired of it, but I nonstop am asking cab drivers, what's your favorite place to eat? What's the best fratanga in town? What's the best bar? And you just write them down. And when two or three people you've asked a day all mention this one arepa stand across from the government center, you go to that arepa stand. And that's literally, I'm being honest, 100% honest. That's how I got to the new arepa stand, because the old arepa stand that I had loved so much had a line down the block, and it was now like 3 or 4 young guys doing it and not the grandma, because business was too big. It overwhelmed her. And I think then the arepa changes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had to find the new place that's undiscovered.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of people traveling with you, you are getting involved in group travel this year. You've got an opportunity coming up for people to travel with you, I believe, in Italy. Tell us how that came about and what you're anticipating with that.
I don't know what I'm anticipating.
You don't know what you got yourself into.
The single biggest question for the last 25 years of my life, which is my public era, has been, how do we travel with you? Like actually with you, not where you pop in for an hour each day, but like where we're actually traveling with you. And I'm like, you don't. I mean, it's like, that's not, I mean, I just couldn't think of a weirder situation. And we were having an internal meeting here at my office. And I thought to myself, well, I think at a certain point, maybe I'm being unfair to the people that are asking, and maybe I'm making it too much about me. And so maybe I should try it. What's the worst thing that can happen? And so I called a friend of mine who has a group called, it's modernadventure.com. You can go there and sign up for my trip to Sicily. If there's a wait list, we'll probably do it a second time. So, I just thought, well, let's give it a try. And so they let me curate the trip with them. And it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm doing, it's interesting. We went, there's 2 or 3 places where we're going where, the grandmas at the farm are making us a farmhouse dinner, and the farm produces, they grow fruit, they grow olives, it's their olive oil, there's some wine, there's some this, the cousins make cheese at the dairy out back. I mean, it's a real agriturismo, right? That happens to specialize in food fit for human consumption. So it's very popular. So, I'm going there. I want to cook with the grandmas. So I said to the folks at the travel group, I said, I don't want to do a demo the following night back at our hotel. I want to cook with the grandmas. And they're like, okay, so I'm going to do a dish that night for our group. We have a couple fake free nights where you're on your own, go where you want to go, but I'm secretly making a reservation for really good restaurant places I like.
Yeah.
And if 5 people want to go, great. If 10 people want to go, great. And so we've got opportunity for that, and it's just going to be a blast. And I think if folks are interested, go to modernadventure.com, and you can find the Andrew Zimmern Sicily trip and sign up or get on the wait list. I honestly mean what I wouldn't put this out there in the public, but if the wait list gets big, we'll do a second trip. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm excited. I mean, look, I am a people person. I do like going out and spending time with people. Otherwise, I wouldn't have decided to do this at all. But I think it should be fun. I'm hoping I learn as much from everyone else as they're able to learn from me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're excited for you to cross over into our world of group travel. I'm sure there are things you're going to learn, but I'm also sure you're going to have a great time. So welcome to the family.
I think so too. I mean, look, the world isn't made up of, cars and watches and rest of the world is made up of people. And, there are certain groups of people that I feel really at home with. People who love to travel for food and, go to eat for the travel. Those are my people. And I know that people who are coming on this trip with me have to feel the same way. I mean, you're not going to go to Sicily and do it with me if that's not your thing.
Yeah.
Why would you go? So I'm really pretty excited.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful. So that trip is coming up. Is there anything else that you want people to know about?
Well, everything is on andrewzimmern.com. I mean, I do have I've got shows on, and thank you, you're very kind to mention Family Dinner. But I have 2 shows on Tastemade and Outdoor Channel, Wild Game Kitchen and Field to Fire, which are cooking shows. And we're working on some travel shows right now because travel is, quote unquote, back. I believe it's back. And so we're working on some of those so people can look forward to that. But you can find everything at andrewzimmern.com. My Substack is where all the new stuff is happening, and that's pretty cool. I love that community. It's gotten pretty large and pretty fun. And, I can legitimately say the people who subscribe to my Substack newsletter get several things in their inbox every week that nobody else gets. So that's a lot of fun. But you can learn everything at andrewzimmern.com. Everything I do is on the navigation bar across the top. It's an award-winning, fun website. So if listeners haven't been there, you should go to andrewzimmern.com.
Yeah, wonderful. We will link to all of those things. Before we let you go, we have some just for fun questions we ask everybody. So you can answer off the top of your head. No pressure. When you book travel, are you booking a window seat or an aisle seat?
Aisle always. 2B, Shakespeare seat. Always.
The Shakespeare seat. My seats usually aren't in the single digits. I'm not quite at that phase of my travel career.
I just have a lot of miles. That's all it is. I'm a man of the people. I just have a lot of miles. But I would say 99%. And obviously, if I'm traveling overseas, it's not 2B because it's a whole different thing. But on domestic travel, it's always the Shakespeare seat.
Yeah, I love that. So what's something you pack in your carry-on that you wouldn't travel without?
Usually my hot water maker. A lot of hotels don't have them. And I don't want to draw hot water out of that coffee machine that's in the hotel. So I have really good freeze-dried, there's places like Panther Coffee and stuff that make a freeze-dried that's really, really good. And I don't have time, sometimes I'm in a Red Roof Inn in the middle of Arkansas making television. Not a knock against Red Roof Inn or Arkansas. Love it. I'm just saying like a real sort of motel experience in a place that's very much off the grid. And I'm not driving to Starbucks. I mean, it's craziness, right? I want coffee in my room. So I like my hot water. I can put socks in it. So it doesn't take up any more or less space. It plugs in. I can make my instant coffee. I can make tea at night. I have hot water for instant ramen, which I always travel with. You never know when you're going to skip a meal, and that's terrifying to me. So, yeah.
Okay, so if you've got a week with nothing else to do and your favorite airline says, Andrew, we'll take you wherever you want to go, where are you going to pick?
Lalumanu Beach in Samoa, not American Samoa. Lalumanu Beach in Samoa, Lalumanu. You can actually, it's a great beach, but you can actually pay like $20 a night, and there's like tree houses.
Wow.
These palapas up in these trees, and you can stay there. And for another $4, the kids that work there will make you breakfast, which, by the way, includes them diving in the water and grilling a fish for you.
Oh my goodness!
Have with your papaya and other fruit wild that comes off the trees.
Wow!
And it's and an egg. I mean, it's Lalumanu Beach is one of those places I've been that I will never forget. And it's, by the way, sure. Do I want to be, in a $1 million house that's a VRBO in the Algarve in Portugal and have that kind of vacation? Yeah, but I'd rather be way off the grid and really able to relax, where there's no internet, there's no phones, and it's just me and my treehouse for 7 nights and a stack of books. You said a week, right?
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to eat fruit and seafood 3 meals a day. I'm going to come back looking great, rested, head cleared. And it is that part of Samoa. I know it's remote. It's not, I mean, you got to fly to Hawaii to American Samoa, and then a puddle jumper from American Samoa, which is not worth visiting at all, to Samoa. And I mean, it is, Gauguin, Robert Louis Stevenson. It is one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth, and I love it.
Wow. That's amazing. So the last question is, what is something you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with someone you love?
Oh my God. So, I mean, that's a tough question for me. And the reason is, everywhere I went, yes, even in season 1, between Bizarre Foods, Delicious Destinations, and a lot of the other travel shows and things that I've got, I get special access from the country to go to special places that you can't get into, right? We did 24 tribal shows in Bizarre Foods history. These are all protected peoples that the government doesn't allow them to interact with foreigners at the tribe request, right? So you have to put in, as a journalist, you have to submit, an application to spend time with them. To take my family, my son, to spend time with the Juntoisi in Botswana, or some of the other tribal peoples in Amazonia that I've been with, or tribal peoples in the Golden Triangle, is dangerous, right? A lot of drug runners there and international narco traffickers. But there's also tribal peoples there who live in the mountains and hills that some of the greatest experiences of my life, just living with people who live indistinguishably from the way their ancestors did 30,000 years ago. And so, those are the things that I'd love my son to experience. And I'm not sure we'll ever be able to do that. Those are the kinds of things that I look back on in my career and I'm just like, I can't believe I got to do that. I don't know. And then, the dinner I had in Belize with a Maya family that were speaking a dead language and cooked me food that is not cooked anymore. They're one of the grandmother in that family, they owned nothing. They owned a couple chickens and a pig, and they killed a couple chickens to make us a meal. And spending a day with them, no one will ever get to do that again.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. Those people, it just doesn't exist anymore. And so it's pretty rarefied air. I'm a pretty lucky guy.
Yeah. Well, whether you're out there tasting some of the world's most incredible and interesting foods, or you're someone who's guiding people through the national park in your backyard, I think we're all really blessed to get to make our living in travel. So, Andrew, it's been a delight to have you. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing so much of your perspective.
I appreciate it, Brian. Have a great day.
All right, everybody. I want to take a minute to tell you about Corbin, Kentucky, home to adventure, history, and hospitality. Nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in southeastern Kentucky, and conveniently located off Interstate 75 by the shores of the pristine Laurel Lake, Corbin is the perfect adventure destination. It's home to Cumberland Falls and the only moonbow in the Western Hemisphere. Corbin is also the birthplace of KFC. You can still eat where it all began and tour the state-of-the-art museum to learn the unique history of Colonel Sanders. Stop by Sanders Park and take a selfie with the bronze statue of the Colonel, then spend a day enjoying the races at Cumberland Run, Corbin's new thoroughbred harness racetrack. And if you're a food lover, Corbin is definitely the place for you. Downtown is full of locally owned restaurants, not to mention lots of great shopping. When you bring your travelers, you'll find a warm welcome because Corbin loves company. To learn more, follow the Corbin Tourism and Convention Commission on Facebook or visit CorbinKYTourism.com. Brought to you by Team Kentucky. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Andrew Zimmern as much as I did. Andrew is a national treasure. It was a delight to have him on the show. And I got to tell you, Andrew was super generous with his time. In fact, he told us more in my time with him than we had time to include in the episode. So I'm going to encourage you to go over to our YouTube channel, search Gather and Go with Brian Jewell on YouTube to see the entire uncut interview. Now, if you're watching on our website, I'm going to drop that interview video on the episode page as well. But Andrew told us stories about some of his childhood travel adventures. He shared how a guest spot on The Tonight Show absolutely saved his TV career. And he gives us thoughts on some of his favorite dishes and countries all around the world. Those stories and much, much more from Andrew Zimmern available only on the YouTube channel. Go check it out. Now, I do want to take a minute to bring your attention to some of the most important things I think Andrew had to say, because they actually relate to what we do every day in the business of travel and tourism. Now, when we were talking about the difference between today's travelers and travelers of the past, Andrew said, I think people today forget that in the 60s, the 70s, there's no computers, no cell phones. You kind of cobbled together a list of things you liked and went to see. Nowadays, you can literally plan everything on your cell phone. You can see video on your phone of what you're going to eat 3 nights later in Mongolia. He said people can go and seek that out in a way they didn't seek it out before. So the biggest change is the ability for the traveler to understand where they're going and make decisions. He said that makes it a lot more competitive for the people on the ground supplying services. Now, if you work in tourism, you are one of the people that Andrew is talking about. And while, there might be some things that we're nostalgic about for that time where people couldn't plan as much travel on their own as they do now, there are also some really great capabilities that people have, which means that we all have to compete on a different playing field than we did before. That's why it's important to make sure that you are providing experiences that people cannot book on their own, that you're giving them access to something they wouldn't have access to otherwise, and that you are making it seamless to plan trips with you so that they don't have to do the work of hopping on their phones and checking things out days in advance. I think it's also important to realize that this kind of change is going to keep happening. More change and more change and more change with AI and social media and evolving technologies. We're going to see more and more of that. And that means that those of us on the ground in tourism are going to have to stay sharp, stay competitive, and make sure we're staying ahead of what the mass market can do with mass market technologies. Now, when we were discussing the power of travel, Andrew said, I think the act of getting out of your comfort zone has decreased. That's a shame because travel is transformative. I don't know anything else other than a personal tragedy that can change a human being. You go away on a trip. You have to ask questions. You don't know where you're going. You have to be curious. You take more risks. You do things you would never do at home. He said, taking all those risks, you import some of that wisdom and that healthy bravado and that curiosity. You bring that back home and it expands your horizons. You become more patient, tolerant, and understanding with other people. But nowadays, people can afford to play it safe. I think Andrew is exactly right, certainly about the power of tourism, but also about the danger of the overly curated and overly safe travel experience. You've heard me say this before. I believe we in the tourism industry have a responsibility to help our travelers connect with transformational experiences, things that are going to help them grow, help them become more curious, help them become more wise, help them become more empathetic and kind in their everyday lives. If we do that, they're going to benefit, we're going to benefit, and our society is going to benefit as well. Now, finally, when I asked Andrew about how we can find authentic cultural experiences through food, he said, if you want the authentic experiences, you have to ask local people where they go. Because in these times, the dissemination of information about all the cool hip places is already out there. You have to find the stuff you like through your own navigation tools. You know, this goes hand in hand to what I was saying in response to that question from Paul earlier. The best way to find the best culinary experiences is to work with local people who can tell you exactly where they go. And I love Andrew's perspective of saying, ask the cab driver, ask the bellboy at the hotel, ask the person who doesn't necessarily work in tourism, who's not going to point you to the highly commercialized space or the place that everybody posts about on Instagram. Work with people who are going to show you those places in their neighborhoods, in their communities, in the places that don't get enough tourism exposure. If you do the work of finding those places, number one, you're going to deliver your people some really, really memorable culinary experiences. Number two, you're going to be benefiting those communities, and you might even be solving some of the headaches that you currently have in trying to book groups in to popular restaurants. Great stuff there from Andrew Zimmern. Well, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you may remember an episode last year in December when we talked a little bit about the problem of overtourism and whether it really is or isn't an issue for American cities. Well, that has been on my mind some more since then, especially in light of some of my recent travel this year. And I've actually been reconsidering my opinion on the issue of overtourism. And that is going to be the topic of today's Hot Minute. Yeah, that's right. The Hot Minute is the portion of the show where I take 60 seconds to give you my unfiltered views on an issue that impacts tourism every day. So let's put 60 seconds on the clock and get into it. 6 months ago, I told you that overtourism isn't a serious issue for America. And in many places, it still isn't. But after a recent visit to a very popular destination, I'm beginning to rethink that position. I spent this past weekend in a city I have visited many times. This time, though, I found that although much of what I appreciated is still there, the city has changed in some ways that make it almost unrecognizable. The crowds were absolutely overwhelming, and it seemed that corporate interests had overtaken everything since I was there last, completely obscuring the city's unique charm. In other words, overtourism had come to town, and the results weren't pretty. Now, I don't have all the solutions for this problem, but I think part of the answer is to find and develop new experiences in underappreciated places. That's good for the smaller communities that don't get enough visitors, and it might also be good for the cities that currently get too many. That's the Hot Minute. That's how I see things anyway. Of course, as always, you're welcome to disagree with me, and we can still be friends. And hey, agree, disagree, we would love to hear from you. You can send your thoughts, questions, or ideas to podcast@grouptravelleader.com. I read every email that comes into that address. I love hearing from you. And hey, you never know. Your thoughts or ideas might just be the topic of the next Hot Minute. And hey, while you're in the mood to give us some feedback, would you do me a favor? Would you go to your favorite podcast playing platform? And if you haven't already, hit that follow or subscribe button. And while you're there, give us a review, leave us a rating. Those are super helpful, and I am thankful to every one of you who has done that so far. My thanks as well to Andrew Zimmern for joining us today. On the next episode, I'm going to bring you a fascinating conversation with behavioral economist Milena Nikolova. She's going to talk all about hacking the human brain for better travel memories. If you take people on trips, that's a conversation you won't want to miss. Until then, though, remember this. At the end of the day, we're all on this trip together, so let's make it a good one. See you next time on Gather and Go. Gather and Go is hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Jewell. Our publisher is Mac Lacey. Danya Simmons is our creative director. Ashley Ricks is our circulation manager and graphic designer. Our sales team is Kyle Anderson and Talisa Reck. To advertise on the podcast, call Talisa at 859-253-0455. Gather and Go is a production of the Group Travel Leader. For more information about our magazines, podcasts, and events, visit us online at grouptravelleader.com. This episode was brought to you by Coastal Mississippi. Plan your best trip to Coastal Mississippi. Suntime recreation and dinnertime reservations will have you losing track of time with beautiful waterways and seafood fillets. Visit coastalmississippi.com and go have some fun for fun's sake.